I'm Brandon. I don't know.
Fatma.
Okay, good. Just making sure the sound's working. Okay, and yeah, we're so excited to provide a weekly dose of news about the election, about politics, about the pandemic that we're all facing, and shout out to all 7 of my AP Lang students who came from the last stream. I love all of you. You're great. And yeah, this stream should be much shorter in comparison. So make sure you follow all of 5able social media. And one logo that's not on here is TikTok. We made a TikTok and it's at Think 5able. So make sure you go out and follow it because I will be posting some content there and so will some of your other friendly 5able streamers and creators. So be sure you go follow us on all of our social media though, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, in addition to TikTok. So we'll be following the basic format: domestic current events, international current events. We're adding a COVID-19 update, and then quickly talking about the 2020 election. Okay, so I guess we'll get started with these domestic events. So besides like all of the COVID-19 novel coronavirus news that you're seeing in all of the media outlets, there are some other things happening in our society. It's kind of crazy. So the first is that Texas and Ohio have included abortions among the non-essential surgeries and medical procedures that they're saying have to be delayed because of COVID-19. And this actually brings into question whether that's like violating Roe v. Wade, which is a court case you need to know for AP US government and politics for the exam. Basically, you know, Roe v. Wade ruled that women have a right to privacy, and basically like that they can't, like the government can't say what women can do with like their bodies and stuff. And in terms of like SCOTUS rulings, there's a bunch of rulings that the Supreme Court published today. Nothing that's like too controversial over major social issues like guns or abortion or the environment or things like that. But rather, states can abolish the insanity defense, which is what some defendants use in like criminal cases, saying that they were mentally like insane, so they didn't know they were committing the action. An entrepreneur suing Comcast for race discrimination. They have to meet a demanding standard, and there's more specifics in the court briefing if you want to read it on your own time. And states are immune from claims of copyright infringement. So like the state of Nebraska, if they take like your logo, you can't sue them. Fun fact. How does coronavirus play into the insanity defense? Not much. This is just, it's another of like, these were court cases that were argued in like December, and the Supreme Court just takes a long time to release opinions because they have to have like conferences and stuff like that. So these 3 court cases have nothing to do with COVID-19. And by the way, today is it might have been yesterday, I think today is the 10-year anniversary of the Affordable Care Act, which is also known as Obamacare. And we basically saw that the rate of people who are uninsured fell from 22 to 12% in just 2 years after marketplaces opened. We saw that 20 million more people have coverage. And, you know, there are some flaws with the Affordable Care Act, whether that be the high cost, deductibles, a richer insurance industry. But at the end of the day, we've seen that overall, the ACA it protects people with pre-existing conditions. So if you have asthma or diabetes or like even high blood pressure, insurance companies can't make you pay more anymore. And also, if you are under the age of 26, which most, if not everybody, I think in this stream is, you can stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26, which is great because it means we don't have to pay like an insane amount of money every single month to insurance companies. And yeah, I think also like Obamacare enrollment, sorry, I don't know if the audio is cutting out, but Obamacare enrollment was also extended in 11 cases due to COVID-19. So traditionally, you can only enroll for the marketplace premiums and stuff. You can only enroll for Obamacare during like a few months, but it's now been expanded. All right, Bob, do you have anything to add about ACA?
Yeah, there's actually like an interesting court case happening about it right now, because like as we're also like seeing like the healthcare system pretty much like be put under like intense pressure, especially because of like COVID-19 and like how quickly the disease like spreads and how contagious it is. There's also a court case where like President Trump and democratic states are fighting over whether or not it should like still be able to exist, right? And so like pretty much that case revolves around like taxation power and taking away the taxation power that was allowed in like 2012, which is when I think the case was like initially settled. It would pretty much make Obamacare like impossible to exist because it would be very difficult to fund, and it would be like difficult to like compel people to get insurance because it's pretty much like that if you don't have insurance you get like a penalty on your taxes, right? So that's an interesting thing that's like happening, like that no one's really talking about, because it's like as like we need people to like have insurance and have the ability to get care right now in order to like make sure public health is maintained. Like at the very same time, like the Trump administration is doing things to like actively curtail that. And so it's like uninsured people, like low income people who like tend to have the least access to healthcare in the first place, like they're going to be the most impacted if the ACA like is taken away, right? But at the same time, those people are like the most likely in some instances because like they still have to like keep working to like also get COVID-19 in the first place. And so they would really need insurance to not like have insane medical debt because of this disease. So I just think it's like a very interesting balancing act that is happening right now.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. All right, in terms of like international events, every single one of these I realize now is connected to COVID-19 because that's what all of the news outlets are reporting on in terms of news. I think like something's going on in Israel with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who I think is trying to secure more power because he won the election. I think he won almost a majority of the seats. And this is like the third election that Israel has had in the last like year, just because no one was able to get a majority in parliament. It's a different system than what we have here in the US. But in terms of the international events that I have here, basically the Tokyo Olympics might get canceled, but if it's not canceled, Canada and Australia are not showing up. We saw that President Trump talked about chloroquine, I might be saying that wrong, in addition to like other medicine. And he said that it was like something you could use to treat COVID-19, but then like a lot of doctors and even like I think the official, like the doctor from the CDC said that that wasn't true. We actually saw today that Nigeria reported a death from chloroquine, which was a drug that President Trump literally like 24 hours tweeted would be like a miracle cure for coronavirus. Also, we've seen lockdowns everywhere. The UK just had one. Germany has banned groups of 2 or more to stop coronavirus. And we also saw that in Colombia, there were prison riots that have left 3 dead. And that's because of virus concerns in prisons. I've even seen that in my own county. The judge, which is like sort of the mayor, because a lot of my surrounding communities in unincorporated county areas, she basically released all nonviolent offenders from prisons because maybe they possessed like small amounts of like drugs that aren't that serious, and you don't want to spread infection within, like, you don't want to spread a virus within prison cells. So we saw that happening at a local level.
Okay, so all of these things have more to do with like, honestly, it all ties back to coronavirus. So like or COVID-19. So like that's just the world we are currently living in. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of an interesting tie into AP Gov, because it's like surrounding multiple like US senators, like Representative like Kelly Loeffler and like Senator Richard Burr. Like a bunch of them are like being criticized right now because they sold off a lot of personal stocks right before like COVID-19 like hit the stock market. Not like literally, but like its impact was like seen. So like as a lot of people were like losing money, like those US senators like got out ahead of that. And so the reason why that's super problematic, not only because it's like a huge like ethical violation, and you would think that like as a representative who's like there to represent the public interest, you wouldn't want to like use it for personal gain. There's also like they could potentially like after an investigation face like jail time because Congress passed the Stock Act in 2012, and so it basically like said that lawmakers couldn't participate in like insider trading. And so what insider trading is, in case anybody like doesn't know, is that like you're using information that you have prior to like something happening, like a business deal, in order to like sell off a bunch of stock or buy a bunch of stock. And so Senator Kelly Loeffler, in that specific instance, she sold off like a bunch of stock for like companies that would like be impacted by COVID-19, right? And so she also like bought stock for for a telecommunications company. And so the reason why that's super interesting is because we're all using like Zoom nowadays, right? Like to communicate with our class. Like me and Brandon were in the same AP research class, and literally today we had a meeting on Zoom, which is like a telecommunications company, like FaceTime in. And so like companies like that are going to see like more income because more people are using their products because of the situation that we're in, right? Because of like social distancing. And so that's like they had that information prior to the rest of the public, and it was like not released. And so doing all of that insider trading is a violation of the Stock Act. So you would think like it's interesting that it was only in 2012 that they passed a law saying that lawmakers couldn't do insider trading. But yeah, that's the situation that we were in. And so in the past, there have been like Congress people that have been like sent to jail, or one congressman in this instance. So like the House and Senate ethics committees, like they could implement new rules in order to like potentially punish them. But it was also like multiple senators, like, multiple representatives. And so like right now the investigations haven't happened, and all of this is sort of just like not conjecture, but it's just based off of like things like investigations that reporters and journalists have done. It's not like the House and Senate like sat down and like investigated these people. So yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think like representatives should be able to like do insider trading? Do you think that they should like have to resign or not be able to like vote on COVID-19 related bills? Any specific opinions? Yeah, like it seems like the consensus is that like people who are representing us and are like elected shouldn't be allowed to like use information that is going to hurt everyone to their own personal gain. So like, yeah, that was an interesting situation that happened. Like going forward, there may not be a focus on this immediately, but it will likely become something that like if they're facing, especially in Georgia, right? Because we talked about Kelly Loeffler a few weeks ago. She like was appointed to her Senate seat. So it's likely that like whoever the Democratic nominee running against her is will be able to like talk about this issue. Brandon, any thoughts?
I don't know. I think the response from the people who allegedly committed insider trading was that they were following the stock markets in like Asia, and that they use like the news from like China and information from like the media there. But the issue mainly was that they sold the stock the day that there was a briefing about coronavirus from the federal government. Mm-hmm. And so it was like pretty problematic. Also, yes, Perla, the opposing candidate now has T on her. And that actually comes from both sides, the Republican and the Democratic side, because there's a pretty competitive Republican primary for Kelly Loeffler's seat, because this guy named Doug Collins, who like defended President Trump during the impeachment inquiry, was not picked. And Kelly Loeffler, who was like a business executive, was picked by the governor. And even though President Trump wanted the guy who defended him during impeachment to get selected as the senator, he didn't. And so now he's running against her. But also there's like a pretty competitive, I think it's Raphael. No, it's not Raphael. His last name is Warnock. He's like a pretty famous like pastor in Georgia, and I think he's got some momentum behind him. And so, yeah, it's going to make for a pretty interesting 2020 election. For my AP Lang students out there, the way that you could use this in an argument essay is by talking about corruption, and or even like about politics, broadly speaking. Maybe if you need an example in which, our government doesn't work, like I would probably have used this in my essay last year. Hey, Raphael Warnock, got it. Last year, the topic was whether something was overrated, and I talked about American politics. I could have used this as an example about how our politics are overrated because our representatives and senators are using like briefings about like, national security and health, not to communicate to the public, but to sell off their own stock, right? So it's something that I could use. It just depends prompt by prompt. Alrighty.
Yeah, so there's also if you have any questions, like drop them in the chat, any comments you want us to like talk about, like it's all cool. Like we're all here to help, right? So there's also been like a lot of federal action that has taken place, specifically within like the Housing and Urban Development Department. So they halted foreclosures and evictions during the emergency for like all of like their apartments. And so while that isn't the case for a lot of like non-housing and urban development, like apartment complexes and stuff, like we're seeing a lot of cities and counties move towards like putting a freeze on landlords being able to evict people if they can't pay for rent. And so like that's really because of the fact that a lot of people are like having their pay like suspended because of COVID-19. Like they can't go to work. A lot of restaurants are like closing down, and like I think it was McDonald's, right? Like McDonald's today announced that like they weren't going to be like open. I don't know. But there's been like restaurants that have said that they weren't going to be open. So like a lot of people are potentially like not having pay and also facing eviction. So like a lot of tenants are Sava Brandon does do speech and debate. So a lot of these tenants are like moving towards like kind of unionizing and like talking to their landlord and being like, hey, like you can't evict us. And at the same time, cities and counties are like making sure that the exact same thing happens, that like people can't be evicted during this time period because it's like essentially not their fault that like they can't go to work. And so at the same time, the Department of Education is like taking down like the interest on student loans that like people have to pay back. And so it's also allowing borrowers to like suspend payments. And so it goes back to like the exact same thing. People simply cannot pay if they like aren't able to go to work, if they're like being sent home, and like all of these things are happening. And so at the exact same time, we're also seeing like a conversation happening around Medicare for all, right? Especially around like vaccines for COVID being like distributed. People are saying that it should be free because like in order to like protect the public health, especially because of how infectious COVID is, like everyone needs to have access to the vaccine, especially if like they're not immunosuppressed, so like they can get it and we can like increase herd immunity and hopefully get rid of COVID, right? And so at the exact same time, like people are like, it's interesting because it's like every single thing that a lot of people said was not possible because of this crisis is becoming something that seems essential. Like, for example, Medicare for all, being able to like have a national health system that can like withstand the pressure of such like a huge pandemic and be like funded potentially by like the government that could like manufacture, for example, more masks, like going into like the Defense Production Act. That specific act, it would allow the White House to order manufacturers to make a lot of a certain item and like take control of the supply chain. So like that, what that means in this case specifically is that it would allow like the White House to like manufacture like masks and gloves, because we're seeing like a huge shortage of those things in hospitals as like people are buying them up. And so like the White House could also use the act to like distribute like limited resources. So like they could be like, oh, there's not a lot of people in X state, but there's like vast majority of COVID cases are in New York State. So that's where we'll prioritize giving all the resources in terms of like masks and stuff. So they could like control the distribution of those like essential resources when it comes to like controlling the pandemic. And so the issue with the Defense Production Act, though, is that Trump says he does not want to invoke it because he doesn't want to like nationalize specific industries. So it's sort of like a states' rights versus like federal power kind of thing. That's like not exactly federal power, but like a thing going on where like Trump said he doesn't want to like turn into like Venezuela because socialism is bad. But at the same time, having this huge shortage of masks means that like healthcare workers, like doctors and nurses, like people on like the front lines of making sure that like the public health is protected and that like COVID patients and even like just people who are in the hospital, like getting treatment for like cancer are able to like stay safe. That's like a huge problem for them because they're potentially like exposing themselves. And so it's sort of like you have to, in this moment, like put aside like partisan politics and like just prioritize like what is best for the public interest. And so at this point, like, even though like companies like Philips and General Motors are like working to make like ventilators and masks, like it just like isn't enough, right? And so invoking the Defense Production Act specifically would allow the federal government to like actually make sure that the resources that need to be distributed can get distributed. So yeah.
Yeah, kind of crazy time to be alive, literally.
So, okay. Brandon, do you have any thoughts on universal basic income?
Let me tell you. So, presidential candidate Andrew Yang, as you might have known, the guy with the math hat, Make America Think Harder, he popularized the idea of a universal basic income, giving Americans or giving adults $1,000 a month every month for while he's president, presumably. And so, we saw that the idea kind of wasn't really popular among most Democrats, I guess, like the other candidates like Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, who have instead opted for other policies, whether that be a jobs guarantee where like people are guaranteed jobs like in our government and stuff, or, something like, if we improve healthcare, then presumably people like who are unemployed will gain the benefits from that rather than giving them $1,000. But now we're seeing that because of COVID-19, there's some stuff out, like there are some Republicans like Mitt Romney who was like, we should be sending Americans $1,000 a month. And there are other proposals, I think, that give adults $2,000 and kids $1,000. It all depends. And we're seeing that really people do not care about the deficit. Basically, they're like, we can give Americans a lot of money. But the issue is we're seeing that like the most recent proposal that is looking like it's going to pass, or something that's being highly debated in the Senate, at least right now, by Republicans, gives adults a one-time $1,200 check. And it actually, if you make less than $25,000 and didn't file for taxes, or if you make too much based on your tax return 2 years ago, you're not eligible. And that's already leading a lot of people to say we shouldn't be means testing during this time of crisis. We should give everyone money, even millionaires and billionaires, because maybe they can invest it in some specific way. And we're also seeing that especially people who are low income, who work hourly jobs, who can't get unemployment insurance or who aren't getting unemployment insurance and don't have healthcare, they need $1,000, especially to feed their kids meals at the dinner table. And Quinn, I don't know. It depends on, what ends up passing. And is this measure socialistic? That's a good question because, it depends. It depends on what your definition of socialism is. Because oftentimes, if you think about it, the government gives us police services. They give us firefighters. That's technically socialism. Education is socialism. So it all depends on what you call socialism. So I'm actually going to answer student Parker's questions first. Is UBI affordable, especially with all the debt that could result from COVID-19? Well, here's the thing. I don't think our senators or representatives care really what's affordable and what's not, especially since we passed like $1 trillion tax bill that cut taxes for like a lot of wealthy people and corporations. And we have unless ultimately, I think what President Trump has proposed is that we cut entitlement programs, which is like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, or privatize it. That's an issue that will probably happen after 2020. But I don't think anyone really cares about the affordability aspect. What do you think, Valtma?
I feel like, especially, the debate should not be about like affordability, especially if like people, like, it is an important thing, right? Like, we obviously like don't want a huge deficit, but at the same time, if it is such a huge problem, then like we can always like tax it back from like the people who have like billions of dollars, right? Especially if like they're getting $1,000, that's like a drop in the bucket for a lot of like, for it is a drop in the bucket for billionaires, right? But at the same time, that $1,000 could be like the thing that helps a family get by when it comes to like making rent payments, being able to like afford things when like they go to the grocery store or like have to do like childcare or something like that. So I think especially in this crisis, like senators and representatives, like especially because there's also like Republicans backing these kinds of like initiatives, like I don't think affordability is like the biggest thing that like anyone will care about electorally. I think that even if like Republicans support this, they'll probably like see a benefit. Like they'll be able to like talk about like later on the campaign trail, like, oh, during COVID-19, like I made sure every family had like $1,000 to like feed their kids, right? Like inversely, like they could, if they vote like against these measures and like against bills that have like especially like helping people with like lower incomes, like they'll see a larger impact because it'll be like, what did your constituents during COVID-19? You like voted against these bills. So I think that especially in these like specific situations, affordability won't be like the biggest thing talked about.
Yeah. All right. Perla asked earlier something about DACA being challenged in court. It's a great question. You know, I don't think they've announced a decision yet, right? But I think it's been argued at least. I might be wrong on that. Falkman, do you know?
I haven't heard anything about it.
I know we covered it in a previous current event stream, but I think right now the DACA program is still here to stay. Although I think if it's probably going to become an issue come November or, you know, September, October, November, whenever like the whole Democratic nominee versus President Trump thing happens, and President Trump will probably advocate for stricter immigration rules, both legal and illegal, as he's been doing at least for the past few months. So that will be something that we'll see happen or materialize in the next few months. Okay, cool. Okay, so I guess we can, we always do like this, or Falkman usually does this like weekly Senate race, I guess, because, you know, Democrats currently are in control of the House. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House, and Republicans control the Senate 53 to 47. So right now, Democrats want to take back the Senate, and hopefully if they took back the Senate and the presidency, they'd have the trifecta. They could probably pass legislation that, you know, aligns with their agenda. So this week's Senate race is North Carolina. And basically, Tom Tillis is a first-term senator who won in 2014 off of like the Tea Party wave, I think. So he only won by 1.5%. And North Carolina is traditionally like a swing state. And the guy who's challenging him is Cal Cunningham. He's an Army veteran. He's a former North Carolina state senator. And he's really, I think he's more what you call a moderate Democrat, and that North Carolina is not a state where you can be progressive on like the Green New Deal and Medicare for all, because voters just would not align with that message. At least that's what we saw in 2018 in terms of, you know, the moderate message in terms of flipping House races and stuff. So we're seeing that, like, you know, he's arguing that Tom Tillis is taking money from special interest groups, that kind of stuff. And polls right now are very, very tight. I think one poll had Cal Cunningham up by 5 points. One poll had Tom Tillis up by like 2 points. And a website that I highly recommend all of you check out in terms of like polling and stuff is realclearpolitics.com or 538.com. And they all like aggregate like polling averages and stuff. And you can see like the competitive races in like Arizona and Maine and even Montana this year, where we're going to see that Democrats have a shot of retaking the Senate. And like we're already seeing this kind of momentum per se happening in the last few years. In 2016, even though Trump won, a Democratic governor got elected at the same time, which is pretty crazy in terms of like the ticket splitting. We saw that nine state House seats were flipped from Republican to Democrat. They broke the Republican supermajority in the state Senate. It actually went from 34 to 15 to 29 to 21. Part of the reason why that happened is because the courts ordered North Carolina to actually redraw their district lines, which ties in with an important AP US government and politics topic, gerrymandering. Remember, which is the whole idea that you can't create districts that only benefit, well, technically the Supreme Court ruled that you can do partisan gerrymanders. You can't like gerrymander based off like race or anything like that. But states are individually striking down striking down districts and making them redraw them. So we saw that, North Carolina has seen a fair bit of movement to the left fair bit of movement to Democrats, and consequently, this will be a pretty crazy race. So do you have any question, or Fatima, do you have anything to add?
No, not on this one.
Yeah. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. Follow us on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. If not, thank you so much for coming, and we hopefully will see you next Monday.
Bye, guys.
All right. Bye, guys.